The information provided on this podcast is not legal advice and is intended for the sole purpose of providing education and legal information. Laws change over time, and the information provided on this podcast may not be up to date. We make no warranty, express or implied, regarding the information provided by our team or our guests on this podcast. The information should not be construed as legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship with us or any of our guests on the podcast. If you would like to consult with an attorney, please call 1-800-VICTIMS. That's 1-800-842-8467 for attorney referral contact information. This podcast provides a platform for the exchange of ideas and information to help educate crime victims on their rights. Some content will include topics and materials that may involve descriptions of violence or assaults which can be distressing to victims and survivors. It may also impact service providers experiencing vicarious trauma. This is Season 2 of Knowledge is Power, Victim to Survivor, a podcast series where we help crime victims understand their rights so they can go from victims to survivors. On this episode, we'll discuss the California Victim Compensation Board. Welcome in, everyone. It's me again, your humble host, Nima Malavi with the Victims of Crime Resource Center. And today it's my pleasure to welcome in Lynda Gledhill into the podcast. Lynda is the Executive Officer of the California Victim Compensation Board. Lynda, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast here today.
Thank you for having me.
So what I'd like to do, Lynda, is start by asking you about the California Victim Compensation Board, or CalVCB. Could you tell me a little bit about CalVCB's history, its goals, its mission?
Absolutely. CalVCB dates to 1965. That was the year that California created the first victim compensation program in the nation. And our primary mission is to administer the program, which provides reimbursement for crime-related expenses to victims in the state of California. That includes any unforeseen expenses that are the result of a violent crime, physical injury, threat of physical injury from a violent crime. Our goal is really to make sure that the victims of the state of California know that there are resources available to them. For myself, I started at the organization at the beginning of 2020, and my goal really is to increase our outreach to victims, to let them know that we're here to help them, and to make sure that our help is easily accessible to them in whatever form that is for them. We want to make sure that they don't have to do a lot of work to receive the help that they need. We want to be able to help them as quickly and smoothly as possible.
So I also understand that CalVCB is a payer of last resort. Can you tell me exactly what that means, payer of last resort?
Yes, it means that we will cover expenses that aren't covered through some other means. So that could be things like medical or dental or vision insurance, other public programs such as Medi-Cal, auto insurance, workers' comp benefits, or even civil lawsuits. So depending on what the nature of the crime is and what other resources the victim might have, those resources come first, and then we're there to cover expenses that they're unable to cover through some other means.
So if someone's insurance would only cover up to a certain amount, and then there were maybe additional expenses, perhaps that's where CalVCB might come into play?
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly. Or if they, are just uninsured, right? And so a lot of the folks that we help don't have any other means of reimbursement for some of the expenses that they're facing.
Got it. So the payer of last resort means that CalVCB will come to compensate if there are no other sources available, essentially.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense.
And I just want to say it's important that victims tell us about those other sources up front. We will work with victims to make sure that we cover what's not being covered in some other way. But it is possible that if we later learn that there was other monies available to the victim, that we have to collect back. So again, it's just being a good financial steward of the fund is important to us. We want to help victims who really need our help.
Got it. So the message would be it's important for crime victims to sort of be upfront and communicate with maybe other sources of payment for some of these expenses.
Exactly.
Okay. So Lynda, let's talk about the eligibility requirements. Could you tell me what are the requirements to make someone eligible to receive benefits from CalVCB?
Yes. Yes, they have to be the victim of a qualifying crime, which includes physical injury, threat of physical injury. There are a handful of cases where emotional injury, this comes up in pornography a lot, can be considered a compensatable crime. And then, of course, there's, family members can be compensated potentially as well. So the most common crimes that we cover include domestic violence, sexual assault, physical assault, homicide, drunk driving, stalking. Some of those crimes are the most common that we see.
Okay, and now you did mention family members might sometimes qualify. Let's maybe get into that a little bit deeper. Could you tell me the difference between what a direct victim is and then what a derivative victim is?
Of course, a direct victim is, of course, the person who was, personally impacted by the individual who was the victim of the crime, the direct victim. A derivative victim is somebody who has a relationship and suffers a loss as a result of the injury or death of the victim. So it could be often it's a parent, a child, a spouse, somebody who is impacted by the crime directly.
So can both direct and derivative victims receive benefits from CalVCB?
Yes, they can. Usually, the derivative victims are eligible for mental health, funeral, burial expenses, support loss, sometimes some medical expenses, or home security improvements. So they absolutely both can receive benefits.
Okay, and now let's talk about the qualification aspect. What are the factors that influence whether a particular application either qualifies or does not qualify for receiving compensation?
So, there's a couple things. So you have to be a California resident, right? Or if you're a non-resident, or the crime must have occurred in California. So there's a geography, right? You have to have cooperated reasonably with police and court officials, and you have to cooperate with our staff, right?
Okay.
So you have to be responsive to us if we have questions or need further information. You need to be able to provide that. And also our statute of limitations is currently 7 years. So the crime has to have happened within the past 7 years. Or if you're a direct victim who's a minor, once you turn 21, you have 7 years to file your application. And then the other factors, obviously we have to qualify, make sure that there's a qualifying crime that happened, and and as I mentioned earlier, that there aren't any other means for which you might be compensated for the crime, right, for the pain. Yeah.
And I know you mentioned in the last sort of the last answer that qualifying crimes are physical injury, threat of physical injury, and then in some cases emotional injury. So there has to be all of those components must be in place, right?
Some of those, yes, any of those are components. So it doesn't have to be all of them, but
Okay.
but there needs to be some sort of injury, I guess is the way to say that.
Okay, and so let's talk about maybe the types of expenses that qualify for compensation. Could you maybe give us an idea about what are some of the most common expenses?
Yes, the most common are medical related, so the doctor's bills, hospitalizations, mental health treatment is common, and funeral burial. Those are probably our most common expenses that we pay for. We also do pay some income loss, and also home security, especially in cases of domestic violence. Relocation is another expense if for either a domestic violence incident or perhaps other cases where the person is no longer feel safe in their own home. Then we'll pay up to $2,000 of relocation expenses. There are some other ones. The legislature recently passed a law that allows us to pay for veterinary fees for if a guide dog or a service dog is injured in some way or stolen or killed. Then we will pay up to $1,000 to replace the service dog.
Okay, now Lynda, you mentioned as one of the expenses that will qualify for compensation being income loss. Could you expand on that a little bit and tell us a little bit about what kind of income loss qualifies and how that works?
Yes, if a victim of a crime, of a qualifying crime, is no longer able to work as a direct result of that crime, then we can pay an income loss up to 5 years following the date of the crime. This really happens when the victim is permanently disabled. Then potentially that can be extended, but remember there's a maximum cap to all of our benefits of $70,000. So all of this goes up to $70,000. We do require a tax form to show proof of the income in order to qualify. And then for a parent or a legal guardian of a minor victim who is either hospitalized or unfortunately dies as the direct result of a crime, we will pay up to 30 days of wage loss for that parent or legal guardian.
30 days. And then could you maybe expand upon some of the more common reasons why an application might be denied?
Sure. So we obviously we need proof that there was a crime that occurred, right? So that is most often takes the form of a police report. There are a few exceptions to that, but that is the primary way that we determine that a crime took place. If a person is on parole, probation, or registered as a sex offender, they are not eligible for our crime. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a time limit, right? It has to be within the last 7 years. And there's no, you're not allowed under our rules to be involved in the crime. So if there's any sense that there was involvement, then that would be a disqualifying factor.
That makes sense. Thank you, Lynda. So could you help me understand what the timeline looks like for receiving compensation? So, for example, if the crime occurs, let's say today. And then what does the timeline look like for submitting the application for it being processed and then having either an approval decision or denial decision? How does that work?
Sure. So the application process in total takes 3 to 6 months. We're working on trying to tighten up that process timeline. The application can be filed. As soon as the application is filed, it begins the process. The key is, as I mentioned earlier, determining that the crime took place. So, and as I often said, that is most often a police report. And sometimes that takes a little bit of time for either us or the victim to get a hold of, because the police are obviously very busy. So that's one of the key elements that we try to work with law enforcement up and down the state to make sure we're able to gather the necessary evidence. And also we need all of the documentation that we ask for, and that includes bills. Your application can be approved. You will we pay based on bills that we receive. So we actually need the bills from either your medical provider, maybe your mental health, the home security equipment, whatever the expenses that you're looking to have covered. Once we get those bills, then we make the determination, was the expense related to the crime, and then we can begin the payment process.
Okay, now Lynda, when you say it's based sort of on bills received, could that also include like a receipt or reimbursement?
It can. We will take a receipt for instance, home security or something like that. We often work directly with some folks as well. So that's very common in funeral burial, where we will pay directly and to the funeral home if that's what's necessary. But yes, receipts for we'll take receipts from, for instance, mental health or medical providers, and reimburse the victim for those expenses.
So can we talk about if a victim submits their application through the DA's office, will that help expedite the timeline at all, specifically a victim witness assistance center in any of the counties? We have people in some of the counties who work directly with us to help process applications. We're hoping it shouldn't change how quickly the application is processed. It's possible that the folks in the counties will have better access or more direct access to some of the documentation that's needed, or will help the victim fill out the application so that it's more complete upon arrival. But in general, all applications are processed the same way and should be on the same time frame. Okay, what I want to do now is transition to talking about emergency expenses. Could you tell our audience what are emergency expenses and how does a victim qualify to receive them?
Yes, emergency expenses is a reimbursement that may be allowed when it's been determined that there would be a substantial hardship if the expense was not paid right away and where there's an immediate need for payment. These usually include the necessities of life, which shelter, food, medical care, personal safety. These are the kinds of items that fall under this emergency expense category.
Immediate needs of life. Okay, that makes sense to me. What about actually going about acquiring a CalVCB application? How can our audience now, after listening to our conversation, how can they go about getting an application to submit?
So there's many different ways to do it. Our website, victims.ca.gov, has an online application that someone can go in and fill out on their own. They can call our customer service center, which is 1-800-777-9229, which is open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And if you have a victim witness center or a victim advocate and you want to work with them, we encourage you to do that as well, and they will help you fill out your application.
Does CalVCB make any accommodations for non-English speakers, non-native English speakers that are interested in applying for the program?
Absolutely. Our application is available in 16 different languages that can be downloaded from our website. We also will help non-English speakers through our customer service call line, the 1-800 number that I mentioned. We can help with translation services as well.
And how is CalVCB funded?
So the primary source of our funding is from restitution fines and orders and penalty assessments. We also receive federal money from the Victims of Crime Act matching funds. Unfortunately, because the state restitution fund is in a deficit right now, we also receive some general fund money to keep the program going.
So if members of our audience have any questions or if they need assistance in either completing or submitting their application, I know you mentioned some of your contact number, your customer service contact number, and your website. What's the best way to get a hold of CalVCB?
Again, we want to make it as easy for people as they want, so they can call us, they can email us. That's info@victims.ca.gov. They can go onto our online website and apply to the online portal. That's an application process. And customer service staff are available to help them, as I said, Monday through Friday. So that is, if you want to speak to somebody, that is the best way to do so.
And for all of our listeners, we'll go ahead and make all of those methods of contact available in the description to the podcast. Now, Lynda, have CalVCB's services or its process been negatively impacted by COVID-19?
So I hope that our services that we provided haven't been negatively impacted. We did, as most people did, move to telework when COVID-19 took effect, but we've made that transition, I would say, fairly smoothly. Our call center never shut down. We've continued to help victims throughout this entire time. The number of applications we received has definitely dropped. I believe, unfortunately, everyone in the victim services community knows that, we think that people just had a hard time accessing those services and might have been stuck in difficult situations. So we're continuing to do as much outreach as possible to make sure people know that we're here for them. And we have started to see an uptick now in the applications, almost back to our pre-COVID days. So we hope that things are balancing out and people are recognizing that there is help out there for them if they need it.
Lynda, thank you so much for coming on the podcast here today.
It was great to be with you. I really appreciate you reaching out to me and having the opportunity to tell people about all of the services that we provide for victims at CalVCB.
Now that you've heard the show, please take a moment to rate and review it. And if you have any questions about any of the information you heard today, you can reach the Victims of Crime Resource Center at 1-800-842-8467. Or you can reach us online at 1-800-VICTIMS.org or Facebook at Victims of Crime Resource Center or Twitter at 1-800-VICTIMS. If you haven't had a chance, please take a look at some of the other episodes in our series. Thanks for listening.